Good afternoon. My name is Nuran Atif. I am the Regional Coordinator for Africa and the Middle East at UNEP-FI. I would like to welcome you all to the Africa and Middle East Regional Roundtable for 2021. In the Projects and Partnerships to Advance Sustainable Finance in Africa and the Middle East session, we will be speaking about the fundamental role of partnerships play in catalyzing capacity building and the transformation from traditional finance to more sustainable and responsible models, and the various projects being implemented in the region. UNEP-FI in itself is a partnership between the UN and the global finance industry, having partnerships at the heart of our work and projects, including being part of the SDG Climate Facility project, which will be discussed today. In this session, we will be shedding light on a number of different examples and a number of projects and work that is being implemented in the region to help build societal resilience and environmental soundness to ultimately achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Climate Agreement, and Africa 2063 through sustainable finance as well. We are joined today by a very distinguished panel of experts in the field of sustainable finance from the region, and I would like to introduce to you Lamia Marzouki, who is the co-chair of the Financial Centers for Sustainable Network, FC4S, and is also the Deputy General Manager at the Casablanca Finance City Authority. We are also joined by Dr. Nasser Saidi, founder and president of Nasser Saidi and Associates, and chairman of the Regional Clean Energy Business Council. We are also joined by Sina Houbous, the Executive Director at the Regional Center for Sustainable Finance, and is also the head of the Sustainable Development Department and advisor to the chairman of the Financial Regulatory Authority in Egypt. Last but not least, of course, we are joined by Sujala Pant, Chief Technical Advisor for the Multi-Partner SDG Climate Facility Project. Thank you so much for being here with us today, and I look forward to having a very interesting discussion with all of you. And before we start, I would like to share with the audience that you can send your questions in the chat box, and we will try to answer them as much as we can during the session. I would now head straight to our talks with on the significance of the synergies and partnerships to achieve a just transition in the region by inviting Lamia Marzouki to share with us more on the work of the FC4S network and the work that they have been doing in Africa and in the Middle East to accelerate the transition towards a more sustainable economy. Lamia, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Nuran. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to take part in this event. First, I will put my hat of Casa Finance City to express my gratitude for our relationship with UNEP-FI, which goes back a long way. We have actually hosted UNEP-FI for the African launch of the Positive Impact Initiatives 4 years ago. And since then, we have been cooperating on various aspects. That being said, as co-chair of the FC4S, let me say a few words about the network. Actually, the Financial Centers for Sustainability Network, the FC4S, is a network of the world's green financial centers, born out of the G7 presidency in partnership with the UN. It represents today over 80% of global equity markets. It was launched on African grounds in Casablanca with the signing of the Casablanca Declaration. And the purpose of the network is to mainstream green finance in the world and to accelerate members' alignment with the Paris Agreement, and in doing so, mobilize increased flows of capital in support of the UN SDGs. On that note, I'd like to share with you what we believe. I mean, we believe within the FC4S that financial centers are one of the main catalyzers of change, because there is a unique characteristic that a financial center offers. It is not only a network of banks or a network of insurance companies, but the synergy of a whole ecosystem of actors: banks, asset managers, insurers, and also regulators. Having said that, how this network is concretely contributing to the greening of the financial systems and assisting its members in meeting their SDGs, this is actually done through multiple ways. One, through international cooperation and multilateral action. The FC4S is a primary forum for public-private collaboration on sustainable finance. And here, it is worth mentioning that we have been able to create a real space, attentiveness, and aura for Africa within this global network. Actually, the first regional platform that has been launched was that of Africa. Then we launched Europe, Asia, and today the Americas is on the verge of being launched. In Africa, the process was not that easy because by and large, the continent is, it's still at a very early stage of the sustainable finance transition, even if interest in sustainable investments in Africa is growing rapidly. But this FC4S African chapter is a unique platform, as it has been accelerating the emergence of new financial centers bodies. It has been a real catalyst for new financial centers, namely Abidjan, Lagos, and even Milan in Europe, actually. And those financial center bodies adopted sustainability as a strategic priority in their DNA from the start. I think the same goes for Cairo, but I will leave it to Sina. And I'm really glad to see Sina with us today in this panel. I mean, Sina and myself took part in multiple meetings, conf calls of the FC4S, sharing updates, learning from each other's experiences, and also sharing some insights about capacity building. And in this regard, I think that within this international cooperation framework, that a major challenge is capacity building, in particular in Africa. There are, I mean, you are all aware of that. There are several challenges in Africa, which are diverse levels of development on sustainable finance. In many countries, sustainable finance is still a niche. And last but not least, Africa represents the weakest link in green finance, even if today it has the greatest potential to make massive leapfrogs in sustainable developments. And therefore here, I'm talking about the need of building expert as well as institutional capacity in a holistic way among all the stakeholders, being, the policymakers, regulators, industry players, and so on. And this is actually what we have been doing over the last few years. And for me, this is the first step to take through training programs, but also raising the awareness and rallying the stakeholders around green finance in Africa. Nouran, just a few words. There is also a second way to advance sustainable finance, which is providing data and allowing members, our members in the FC4S, to assess their level of advancement. Data is crucial because if we manage to evaluate the state of green finance across financial centers and show the progress of sustainable development using data, then we will be able to gain momentum and make a real change. And as a matter of fact, one of the primary roles of the FC4S is to provide data. And in this context, we in the FC4S have put in place a specific tool called the assessment program that provides today an unmatched global reference of where financial centers stand in terms of sustainability. So Nouran, I can elaborate later on this specific tool if you wish to. It's a real, powerful tool built in partnership with all the FC4S members.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lamia, for the great discussion and the great talk and shedding light on the importance of synergies of a whole ecosystem of actors. This is a very excellent point. I would now invite Sujala to share with us more about the multi-partner SDG Climate Facility project, which also touches on the same point as you were mentioning. And now I will give the floor to you, Sujala. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nouran. Let me just share my screen. So good afternoon, good morning, dear colleagues. It's really a privilege to be here today and be able to speak to you wearing my hat as Chief Technical Advisor of this regional initiative, SDG Climate Facility, Climate Action for Human Security in the Arab states, of which UNEP-FI is a very key partner, actually. So we're delighted to be here today during this very important event. Let me start, by saying that with the main question that is being asked in terms of the role of partnership and collaborative efforts in order to meet the SDGs, I think the project, which I'm going to go into some details about, is really a great example to illustrate what is possible in terms of responding to some of these questions about partnerships and working together toward a common objective. So I will do a couple of things today. I'll give you a very brief overview of the project and the partners, particularly since they're a very important part. The way in which the project really includes access to finance as a critical aspect of the initiative, and some examples about ongoing but also envisaged initiatives that we have planned in order to scale up the kind of work that we're currently doing. So as a brief overview, first of all, I think one of the really critical aspects of the project is that we are a multi-partner initiative, which brings together not only the UN agencies that you see on the screen here, but very importantly, some key regional partners, such as the League of Arab States and the Arab Water Council, which provide a lot of the political umbrella as well as very strong technical knowledge in sector-specific issues. The project is focused on the interface between climate action and human security and the impact of that on SDGs. As you're probably aware, data and analysis show that the Arab states is actually a major hotspot for climate change, where temperatures are rising faster than any other region in the world. And what that translates into here is, increased water insecurity, food insecurity, loss of livelihoods, and also displacement of people within and across borders, which can really create situations of instability. However, what the project does is to use this, and the flip side being that just as climate change can multiply threats, it can also help to bring benefits across different dimensions and multiple SDGs. So if we address this cross-cutting nature of climate-related threats and impacts, we can actually help to build back better, greener, and in a more inclusive fashion as well. And this is at the crux of the project in terms of the guiding principles. But we're equally aware that without the finance necessary to support these initiatives, we'll only be able to go so far. And so, as I mentioned, a key objective is increasing access to finance for a region that is often left behind in many ways. Now, how are we doing this? Firstly, there's research and analysis work that is being undertaken to really understand what sustainable finance looks like in the region. And here I would really like to give a shout out to the UNEP-FI and League of Arab States report that was launched earlier this year on sustainable finance, which really lays out some of the issues and the main players. In addition to that, we're also putting theory into practice by showing how we can identify opportunities that are climate-related interventions with multiple benefits. Firstly, we're doing this through resilience grants, and here are some examples of what we're doing in a number of countries. These are all pilots with very nimble and very humble amounts, but the intention is to provide the proofs of concepts that can then help to mobilize additional resources. And we're already seeing some levels of co-financing by different actors as well. From an investment perspective, we are going to be putting together a climate and resilience investment forum later this year, which will be a matchmaking platform between bankable ideas based on this concept with potential investors who are looking for these kinds of opportunities but may not necessarily be aware. And long-term, in line with the sustainable finance priorities of the region, an SDG climate facility will be established. And this really aims to be a go-to stop on all matters related to the climate SDG nexus, bringing together knowledge, data, evidence, partners, and finance across a common platform. And I think this is a good point for me to end here, because this is driven by partnerships, and the different partners are really going to be bringing in their comparative strengths and knowledge and expertise. And when we speak about partnership, it is really public and private, academia to implementing agencies, NGOs on the ground, national, regional, and international. And I'd be happy to delve a little bit into that later, Nuran, if it's helpful. Thank you once again. Let me stop here for now.
Thank you so much, Sujala, for this very valuable information, shedding and highlighting specifically how the topic is cross-cutting across different industries and different areas as well, which shows the essence and the importance of partnerships to work collectively on the same goal. With that, Dr. Saidi, I would now like to invite you to share with us some of the work that the Clean Energy Business Council is doing, specifically regarding the white paper Accelerating Private Finance for the Arab Renewable Energy Transition. Dr. Saidi, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure really to participate in this, but also to shed light on what's happening a little bit in our region. The content of what I will talk about is the result of some work we've been doing with UNDP. So the Clean Energy Business Council, CBC, works across the MENA region. It's a partnership and membership organization. So we're an NGO, not-for-profit. And a lot of our work really is to bring the private sector and public sector together to make clean energy finance happen, clean technology, investments, and the like. So we're just devoted to clean energy and clean technology and its investment across the region. So let me share with you some of the work and also some of the barriers and what it is that we should be working on to accelerate clean energy finance across the region. So to begin with, let's just understand some of the problems we have, which have been mentioned in part already. We're the most water scarce region and food import dependent region in the world. And if you look across our region, wide diversity in terms of economic development, resources, but also climatic conditions. And of course, there's an enormous gap between the countries that have hydrocarbon, oil and gas, and those which are highly import dependent. And that little chart on the right-hand side just shows that, of course, the hydrocarbon-rich countries are big users of energy. The GCC countries, for example, have a carbon footprint and use nearly as much energy as nearly all of Africa, just to put that in perspective. But at the same time, what we're facing is climate change, and that's likely to lead to increased inequality, more social unrest, and affect very vulnerable populations, both within countries and across border. Let me just remind everybody that, unfortunately, we're a region of the world that has 60% of the world's displaced people, because of conflicts, because of violence. But now what's on the horizon is also climate change. And finally, we only have 7% of power in the region is coming from renewable energy. So when you look at the challenges, there are multiple challenges. The demographics, of course, are damning. We have young and fast-growing populations. That means increasing urbanization. Climate change will mean higher heat levels and increased desertification, and that's likely to lead to increased displacement of population because of climate change. We're seeing that already happening in Africa. It'll extend to other parts of our region, and rising sea levels. And at the same time, the big issue for many of the countries of the region that have fossil fuel assets is that as the world transits away from fossil fuels as part of a transition to renewable energy, they run the risk that a lot of their assets will become stranded assets. So their main wealth will no longer be worth what it is today. And that means that it's going to be very difficult for many of these countries to go towards decarbonization, and at the same time, what are they going to do with their assets that they have? So that's going to be a big challenge, how you decouple growth. And finally, I think we mentioned inequality, and when we move forward, the main issue is going to be how do you have growth which is inclusive and have everybody have access to energy. Now, renewable energy promises that, but we need to make that happen. And if you look across our region, we're receiving very little of the finance that's going into renewable energy. These are the numbers for 2018. They haven't improved much as far as we know for 2019, 2020, even though if you look at sustainable finance and the funds going into sustainable finance and renewable energy, we're now hitting 3 trillion, but our countries are simply not on the map. So what are some of the barriers? These results from the work we've done. Let me highlight maybe some of the major ones. There's an issue of the high cost of capital, which we all face. And if you want to attract it into renewable energy and clean technology, it's even worse. But we are developing countries, so the cost of capital to us is higher. There isn't much awareness about within our region and our countries on what is suitable renewable energy solutions. The information is simply not there. And remember that many of the choices in terms of energy are not taken by the private sector, they're taken by the public sector. So our state-owned utilities for water, electricity, and other are run by the state. And that automatically creates a problem because they don't necessarily want to change. They're happy continuing doing what they're doing. So it's a big challenge for them to go towards new technologies and renewable energy. And then, of course, the political economy issue, I think, is a major one. How do we help the countries in the region move away from their high dependence on oil and gas, major contribution to GDP, major contribution to government revenues, and move towards renewables? That's a major challenge, I think. We're going to need to work with all the oil producers to gradually move towards renewable energy solutions. That's going to be a major struggle. And of course, it's not necessarily easy to adopt technology. The technology mostly is imported from the rest of the world. So how do you bring it into our region? This transfer of knowledge, transfer of technology is another major barrier. And finally, when we talk about renewables, there's the issue of intermittency, right? Solar, hydro, and other may not always be available throughout the year or throughout the day. And so you need to find energy storage solutions. Now, the battery industry and storage industry costs have been going down tremendously by some 90% and more over the past few years. But it is not available within our region. We don't have industrial or commercial energy storage. So these are some of the barriers. And the final one, I think, which is important, is that the promise of renewable energy, particularly things like solar, is that you can have distributed energy. You don't have to be on a national grid. But nevertheless, as you start producing more renewable energy, you need to be able to put it on the grid whenever you have an excess. So creating markets for energy, for electricity, is going to be another one of those challenges. So what are the sorts of things that we should be doing? I've divided those into on the financing side on the right and policy and institutional. So if you look at policy and institutional, I think there are two major ones that we need to think of. The first one, if you really want the private sector in particular to engage and to have sources of finance be made available, you've got to eliminate subsidies to fossil fuels, because you need a level playing field between renewable energy and clean technologies and fossil fuels. So that's going to be a challenge for many countries in the region. Even further, we need to go and introduce carbon taxation. Now, introducing carbon taxation also means that although it raises the costs of fossil fuels, which is what you want to decarbonize, but the big advantage is it provides revenue for you. And so government, by imposing carbon taxes, can then use the funds coming out of the carbon tax to fund renewable energy policies and renewable energy investments. So that should be part of the overall financing. But fundamentally, what you need to do is to say, I want clean energy and clean technology as part of policies. It has to be integrated into policies. And one of the things the international organizations should be doing, in my view, is to help countries integrate clean energy and clean technology into overall economic development, as well as energy policies. On the right-hand side, of course, there's a number of issues. Introducing low carbon transition policies, mandatory disclosure of climate risk, I think, is on the cards. We're seeing central banks across the world now moving in that direction. We need to encourage our central banks to start talking about it and talking about mandatory disclosure in the banking and financial system and in the capital markets, and eventually into the other productive sectors. Two things I think would be very helpful. Need to start thinking of developing green banks and maybe blue banks to help fund the private sector, right? It's not just the public sector, so we need that. And it should go all the way from energy efficiency to climate risk mitigation to climate resilient infrastructure, which we're going to require. New energy financing in terms of bonds and sukuk, green bonds and blue bonds and sukuk. And here I think governments, as well as the capital markets and capital market authorities, need to play a major role in facilitating those, and also having governments being able to issue such bonds and sukuk. So what sort of building blocks did we look at? I mentioned 4 of them here. I'll go over them very quickly. Data and information. It's very difficult to attract investment if you don't have the data, if you don't know what the returns are on investments. And unfortunately, our region is very poor in providing data. So one of the major initiatives, I think, is to provide that data and information. So I was very interested in what was being mentioned a bit earlier. Yes, we need the tools, but also need the multilateral banks. And I think we need to remind ourselves that fighting climate change and providing finance for clean energy and clean technology is a public good. Yeah, it is a global public good. It is a regional public good. So we need to be subsidizing this. Yeah, this is critical. We need to think of this as a public good, not just any old investment. There are enormous social benefits, and the costs, as we saw, would make if we don't face those issues, would make our countries much more vulnerable. Third item, I think, is communication, having clear communication and agenda setting. And finally, I think de-risking investments. This can happen through providing guarantees, facilitating, and otherwise through public-private partnerships. I think that would be extremely helpful. So let me thank you. You'll find the report hopefully very interesting, the white paper. So I provided the links over there. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saidi, for this very informative presentation. I will now jump to Sina. If you would please share with us as well a bit more about the Regional Center for Sustainable Finance and the work that you are doing in the continent.
So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be part of such a distinguished group of panelists and experts. I want to thank so much Lamia, because you've said what we need to say, especially when it comes to challenges of Africa and the market. Being part of the network with Lamia has been very beneficial. And this is exactly what we're reflecting and talking about today: partnerships and exchange of information and experience through different networks, through plethoras of international initiatives, can lead to harmonization and a common understanding of challenges and how can we accelerate an agenda, whether through market development or through policy initiation for sustainable finance. So thank you so much, Lamia, for what you've said. Many of the challenges that have been expressed so far, I think, is answered. And one of the answers and tools that we aim to bridge the gap in sustainable finance in Africa and the Middle East is the center that has been initially created in February 2021. It started it was announced in February 2021 by FRA. The center is regional. It directly targets private sector and market development in the Middle East and Africa. And the main axial point of it is partnerships. How can we utilize partnerships and networks of what's going on internationally on a regional level in Africa through different partners, such as the FC4S as one example, of course, and how can we use this to create expert pools, because we need expertise. We need to focus on human resource development if we are to start having a say and influence on the global arena as Africa as well. We also need to start giving or providing Arabic made access to information, research to address and to reach all kinds of constituents in our different markets, especially in the Middle East and Northern Africa. All of such are the mandate of the newly created regional center. And as I've said, the axial and the most important role is how to create and forge unique partnership with experts and people that have the knowledge and the support needed. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel, especially on an international level and a regional level. Maybe part of a lot of confusion that many people talk about is the existence of many initiatives in different countries, in different international organizations that has not been really interlinked and connected. And this is part of what we want to do at the center. Is to interconnect and link together different initiatives, different international partners, to make sure everything is being redirected towards redirecting and convincing the private sector and companies into investing in sustainable finance and offering sustainable finance facilities, whether they are non-banking financial institutions or even in the banking sector. This is in a nutshell what we want to talk about. And I think that the new center embodies this message very well and clear. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sina, for sharing this with us. And it's absolutely excellent that the center is now working with the Middle East and Africa region. This is exactly what is needed. And building also and linking to what Lamia was saying at the beginning, I would like to direct the first question to the panel to Lamia. Lamia, you touched on the importance of data and the assessment program as a tool elaborated by FC4S. Would you please share with us more in-depth details about the tools, its benefits, and so on and so forth? Thank you.
Sure, Nuran. The assessment program is a major tool that we have put in place 3 years ago. It takes the form of a survey with a specific framework sent once a year to all the financial centers members of the FC4S to measure, track, and integrate sustainability. So the purpose is, one, to provide members with a baseline alignment to the Paris Agreement. Two, to help identify areas where more focus and even assistance is required, and to provide guidance in this regard and even develop strategic programs. And last but not least, it is also to influence the development of legal and regulatory frameworks. What is special about the assessment program is that it is not in any way a benchmark or a ranking of financial centers, so to speak. It's not a beauty contest. Each financial center receives a targeted report with key highlights and focused areas of assistance. And then you also have a consolidated report which shows the progress made collectively and also highlights the collective challenges the financial centers face in further advancing the agenda of sustainable finance. For instance, the lack of sustainable finance talent, thirst for data, which is actually by itself a challenge, and the global public policy convergence required. Today, its findings have already been referenced in several other analyses so far. For instance, by the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action, and also the G20 Sustainable Finance Study Group. To echo what Nasser said earlier about data scarcity and to support data collection, actually this year, we are organizing workshops and training sessions for members to ensure they are well positioned to collect the data point. And we are also seeking to partner with key market data providers to assist with data collection, for instance, with the climate bond initiatives.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Lamia, for sharing this. This is excellent. And if we will also like to share a link with the audience regarding the assessment program to be made available to the public that we're sharing with the session. Also, Sina, building also on that discussion, I would like to ask you is that you can share with us also from a non-banking financing side as well, what are the plans that the regional center will be working on to support the work of private finance sector to enable the knowledge access and the access to data and enhance the integration of sustainable finance practices in their business models?
Thank you so much, Nuran. Now, we will be building actually on an excellent study that have been mentioned, I think, throughout the session by UNEP-FI and was in partnership with the Arab League. As part of our assessment of the region and what's going on, we'll be partnering with a number of colleagues and partners to conduct a priority country assessment for a number of Middle Eastern countries and countries that will be selected from Africa as well. We've signed the Nairobi declaration and pledge with PSI, part of your work as well, Noor. And we are very keen now in supporting companies not only in Egypt but in the region to adhere to the pledge of sustainable insurance, because it's one of our main priorities to promote sustainable finance as well. We are working now on an MOU and partnership with the Egyptian Federation of Insurance and the Arab Regional Federation of Insurance to start providing certification and international capacity building executive diplomas in sustainable insurance for different functionalities within the sector, whether underwriting, whether actuarians, or even high management, and even members of the board tackling or sitting on boards of companies in the insurance sector as well. We're also looking for partners to initiate a number of trainings on sustainable finance, because we have our studies, our initial assessment have shown that there's a lack of awareness and total understanding of the business case and the importance of opening up new niche markets in the region and how can companies benefit from all of these. And as such, we are also gonna provide a package of training of a very initial introductory courses on sustainable finance, on the business case of sustainable finance, and how companies should start implementing and integrating sustainability as an institutional perspective. Also, we will be tackling governance as part of sustainability, ESG reporting, TCFD, because FRA is already now in the process of, which is the Egyptian Regulatory Authority, is in the process of enacting a new legislation forcing companies to disclose information on ESG and TCFD. So all of these are now on our upcoming agenda, whether nationally or regionally, and hopefully it will be in total alignment and partnership, and this is what we're keen on with international academia, think tanks, institutions that will provide the training for the companies we are targeting in the region. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sina, for sharing this. This is excellent news, and we look forward to having people join in this great initiatives and the great capacity building. I would like to jump to Sujala quickly and say that the SDG Climate Facility brings together a number of partners, as you mentioned, and each partner is building their own partnerships as well to deliver on the project activities. Would you please share with us how this project and the Nexus are different from existing adaptation and mitigation opportunities, and how it can help mobilize finance for climate action and human security in the region? Thank you.
Sure, Nuran, thank you so much. That's a great question, and probably something that we get asked quite a bit in terms of, so what's different about this integrated approach, the climate security angle. I think from the outset, the approach underscores that cross-cutting nature of climate change. So we are really talking about the impacts of that on various sectors, whether it's agriculture, water management, governance, and peace as well. And that's something that those are issues that are thought about from the outset. So it's not a secondary objective, but it's really part and parcel of conceptualizing the solution, whereas maybe a more traditional adaptation or mitigation project really have the climate rationale as the overarching ambition. Both of them are necessary, but that's, I would say, one of the differences. Now, what does that mean for partnerships, and how can partnerships be helpful to mobilize? I think whether we speak of public finance or private finance, ultimately someone who is putting in money, whether through grant funding or as an investor, they want two things. They want to know what they're going into, and they want to understand potential risks. And so when you have multiple partners working on different aspects of this, some who are focused on the data generation, some who are focused on, working with on the enabling environments, others who really understand the on-the-ground context. You're really providing a potential investor with enabling them to take informed and evidence-based decision-making. And I think that's a real value added, and not something that only one partner can provide when you're talking about all these various sectors and different dimensions. And secondly, partners are required to address, even once the investment is there, once the resources are there, different partners are going to take different leads depending on their advantages. So whether it's from, supporting the enabling environment for the right kind of regulatory reforms required to incentivize the investment, whether it's de-risking and identifying the barriers, or even convening people, because oftentimes we speak a different language. The private sector world speaks a different language from us in the development sector, and climate change is maybe not something that's necessarily yet understood at a level that's required to take some of this action forward. So I think these are all kind of the benefits and the advantages of going in a collaborative effort from the get-go when addressing the need for sustainable finance and increasing access to finance as well. Thank you, Nuran.
Thank you so much, Sujala, for clarifying that and for explaining also which relates to the importance of also public and private partnerships as well, included in that work. With our final question, Dr. Saidi, I would like to ask you, given the discussion that Sujala just provided and her answer, how can the finance sector play an effective role in opening new doors of opportunities to enable public-private partnerships and create the link between the two sectors?
I think it has to start, the private sector and financing needs to have a very clear strategy at the level of the country. It has to start there. So you have to start with a climate risk assessment of any country. You have to have a clear strategy, and you have to have clear policies and incentives. And it's all around the pricing of carbon risk. And if you don't price carbon risk, you're not going to be able to provide the financing for renewable energy and technology. I think that is critical. So what does that mean? It means that you need a legal and regulatory framework, and you need monitoring. We have lots of money now wanting to come into sustainable finance. But who is going to monitor that you don't have greenwashing, right? That funds get diverted somewhere else. We don't have a monitoring framework yet. We need to put that in place. We need to have also accounting. Our accounting standards, IFRS, etc., still don't know how to account for climate risk and the like. We need to develop that. So what we need is two things. We need the multilateral institutions, World Bank and all the others, to help provide finance, to partner with local governments, to put together regional funds as well as national funds. I think that's one part of it, because this issue of de-risking is critical. The private sector is not going to go in on its own and put in billions if it doesn't have clear policies and there is not risk sharing. So that has to come from multilaterals plus governments. But more interesting, I think, I'm a strong believer in the role of the private sector. So what we need is our capital markets authorities and our capital markets, so people like Lamia, who are doing work in financial centers, to say, I want to develop green financial centers across the region and link those green financial centers and facilitate the listing of green bonds, blue bonds, sukuks, as well as funds that go into renewable energy. Remember that these are long-term investments. So it's not just sufficient to finance the companies that are doing it. You're going to need to provide financing for 15, 20 years. I mean, that is the sort of horizon. And therefore, you need renewable energy funds to be set up and funded. So if we provide the information, if we know how to price the risk, and we have the clear strategies, I have no doubt that we'd be able to attract lots of funding for the countries of our region, because if I look across our region, renewable energy can be very plentiful. We don't have a lot of water, but we've got plenty of sunshine. So when I think across our region, in terms of investment in renewable energy, this could be very transformational for our region. And instead of being based on fossil fuels, we'd be based increasingly on renewable energy, solar, and the like. So I want to end on an optimistic note there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saidi, for this very elaborative answer. In interest of time that we have for the session, I would like to ask the panelists if we can have, if each one can share in 1 minute what you see as the next steps on advancing sustainable finance and partnership in Africa and the Middle East. Sujala, can we start please by you?
Sure, Nuran. That's a big question and a tough one, but if I could maybe mention 2 or 3 points. I think firstly, it's we know public finance isn't enough. We know that there is a lot of private finance waiting to be unlocked. And there is a need to take, we know the need is there. How do we take that step to really kind of go from pilots, small scale initiatives? You know, the transformational scale that's required is really what we need to be looking at. And I do believe that, again, that the partnership efforts are required to enable that, because we need to be looking at diverse financing instruments as well, blended finance that bring different partners together, de-risking so that you're sharing some of these, the unknown, so to speak. But I think also at the same time, there are proofs of concepts, there are successful initiatives, and it's really about then presenting that. A lot of times it's also just not knowing what's possible. So presenting those opportunities, presenting that information to those who require it is essential. And then the internalization. I think what Dr. Saidi said earlier, that we are talking about a greater social good, and we each have a role to play, and internalizing that and not seeing it as an either or, but something that we can actually work together with mutual benefits for the planet, but also for our own sort of businesses, for our own sort of rationale, is possible and makes sense. Thank you, Nuran.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sujala. Lamia, I would like to direct the same question to you as well in 1 minute, please. Thank you.
To echo what has already been said, I think that we need to put in place the appropriate framework. And actually, it's precisely what we have done at Casa Finance City, where we have put in place a broad value proposition that has enabled us to attract international investments and channel them to the region. I'm talking here about doing business fast tracks, community intelligence, expertise on how to do business in Africa, obviously legal and tax framework, and so on. But the challenge now is to have something more specific for green and sustainable players. And this is something that we are working on right now through our international partnerships, even within GFC4S. Let me end on an optimistic note in this COVID crisis. I believe there is a potential for this pandemic to catalyze a durable shift towards an inclusive, low carbon and resilient world. So we should seize this opportunity to rethink the structure of the economy and to mainstream green finance. And actually, on a global scale, this pandemic has clearly added further impetus to the ESG agenda. And for me, the future of finance can only be green and sustainable.
Thank you so much, Lamia. Sina, as well, in 1 minute, please, if you can share your thoughts. Sina, I think you are on mute.
Apologies. So in a nutshell, I think that bridging the gap in the market and developing the market and supporting the private sector is a major and should be a priority. And I think the center is the initiative that can be scaled and replicated elsewhere to support promoting sustainable finance and accelerating the move and integration and adoption of sustainable finance related practices. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Saidi, as well, in 1 minute, please, if you can share your thoughts.
Sure. I think we have to go beyond sustainable finance. To me, sustainable finance is déjà dépassé. It's the past. We have to think about climate finance and climate risk mitigation finance. That is the future. And for our region, we need to think of 3 areas where we need to attract the finance. Infrastructure, electricity, water, power, water, housing, and retrofitting, and the transport sector. Those are the 3 areas we need to focus on because of the underlying demographics and because of the high energy use. And finally, I think you need to build capacity. We need the engineers for renewable energy and clean technology. So our universities and technology institutes need to focus on teaching people, not always importing stuff from the rest of the world. And second, we need to build the capacity in our banks and financial institutions. Many of them simply don't know how to evaluate projects. Build the capacity. And that way, it'll be much easier to attract finance internally from our countries and also from the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saidi, and I would like to thank you all for participating and joining us today for this session and for the knowledge that you've been sharing. I think we shared excellent views on the importance of partnerships and synergies and the different projects that are happening in both Africa and the Middle East to help scale up sustainable finance and the knowledge on sustainability to achieve the SDGs, Paris Climate Agreement, and Agenda 2063. Thank you so much for your contribution and for your participation. And I hope you enjoyed the session as much as I did. And I would like to wish you a very good day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye.